Cześć.
Cześć. Ustawiłam sobie laptop tak. Zaczynać, prawda?
Ja jestem gotowa.
Tak, no to dobrze. No
Tak.
to zaczynamy. Okay. I pleasure to welcome you to our penultimate lecture organized by Contested Legacies, the international research platform Contested Legacies, in the collaboration with Sarah's department at the University Sapienza in Rome. Today's lecture will be given by Professor Małgorzata Abassy from the Jagiellonian University, who will speak about contested legacy in Russia. The title of her lecture is Contested Legacy, the Argument about Lenin, and Professor Abassy is an associate professor at the Jagiellonian University. She is director of the Institute of Russian and Eastern Europe, as well as head of unit for modern Russian culture and cultural systems theory. She has published 5 monographs and several dozen research papers. She specialized in comparative perspectives on Belarus, Russia, and Poland. Today's lecture will focus on a very interesting and very controversial issue, namely the legacy of communist legacy in Russia, especially on Lenin's legacy in modern Russia. As we know, Lenin is a symbol of Russian Revolution 1917. However, his central position in the Russian political culture has been recently contested by Vladimir Putin. Despite the fact that arguments about Lenin is not now not new in Russia, it started in the early 2000s. However, Vladimir Putin seems to use the past and especially Lenin's legacy in his political discourse. And I think the main topic of the lecture will be how Putin uses the past in his political narratives. Now I give the floor to Professor Abassy, and I'd like to remind you that after the lecture, we will dedicate 15-20 minutes for discussion. Thank you, and Małgorzata, the floor is yours.
Joanna, thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you to all of you who are present here. As Joanna mentioned, argument about Lenin is not new, and it goes with its roots till the 20s of the 20th century. So it has not started from Putin. It started much more earlier. I hope to shed some new light on the problem, and I would like to show that it is not only contested legacy, but the legacy is also affirmed by some bodies. Let me to show you my screen and to make a presentation visible. Okay, I would like to start from two short definitions within which I framed my today's speech. The general notion for the speech are contested legacy, which is the leading topic of the platform, and cultural memory, which is the leading problem for my research and generally my way of looking at different problems. So what is contested legacy in the most general meaning, in the most general understanding? Contested legacy refers to a situation where there is a dispute or disagreement over the interpretation, significance, or memory of the actions, achievements, or impact of an individual or group on history, society, or culture. It often involves conflicting narratives, differing perspectives, and contrasting opinions about how someone should be remembered or their legacy assessed. The contested nature of a legacy can stem from various factors such as historical or societal context, political ideologies, cultural biases, personal experiences, and changing attitudes over time. In the Russian culture, all that approaches are present. Cultural memory, in turn, refers to a collective knowledge, experiences, and traditions shared by a particular cultural or social group. It encompasses the ways in which a group remembers and interprets its past, including historical events, myths, rituals, customs, and cultural artifacts. Cultural memory shapes the identity, values, and beliefs of a community, and it's often transmitted through various mediums, such as oral traditions, art, music, monuments, religious practices, discussions, and so on. It is important because it helps individuals and communities understand their place in the world and establishes a sense of continuity and connectedness across generations. Cultural memory can also be subject to process of exclusion, revision, and manipulation, as different groups struggle for control over the interpretation and representation of the past. Exploring the ongoing debates about Lenin's legacy in Russia is rather complicated because Lenin's legacy remains a subject of ongoing debate, reflecting divergent viewpoints on his role in Russian history and his contribution to the country's development. A number of key points of view can be identified in this debate. I decided to show 4 of them, but probably more can be distinguished. First of all, there are the opinions expressed by supporters of Lenin's legacy. Some Russians still view Lenin as a crucial figure who laid the groundwork for the Soviet Union and shaped the course of the revolutionary era. They appreciate his role in overthrowing the Tsarist regime, redistributing land to peasants, and establishing a socialist government. These supporters argue that Lenin's policies created a fairer society, introduced education for all, and allowed industrialization to rapidly transform the country. Secondly, Lenin also faces criticism from a significant segment of Russian society, particularly those who identify themselves as anti-communist or conservative. They blame Lenin for the subsequent totalitarian rule of Joseph Stalin and the repression and loss of life that followed. Critics argue that Lenin's authoritarian tactics, such as suppressing political opponents, banning opposition parties, and centralizing power, laid the groundwork for the emergence of a repressive regime. They also highlight economic policies like the forced collectivization of agriculture, which caused massive famine and social unrest. Thirdly, historical reassessment can be observed. In recent years, there has been a trend in Russia toward re-evaluating historical figures, including Lenin. Some argue for a more evidence-based approach to understanding Lenin's role, looking at both positive and negative aspects. This includes acknowledging Lenin's contribution to women's rights, worker protections, and anti-imperialist movements, while also acknowledging the suppression of civil liberties and political opponents during his rule. Moreover, calls for Lenin's removal can be heard. A vocal minority in Russia advocates for the removal of Lenin's monuments across the country, arguing that they symbolize a regime responsible for numerous crimes and human rights abuses. These critics advocate for a complete break with the Soviet past, suggesting that Lenin's statues should be removed and placed in museums where his significance can be discussed and debated. Overall, the ongoing debates about Lenin's legacy reflect the complexities of Russia's history and its ongoing search for a consensus on how to interpret and remember the past. As different generations and political ideologies clash, the conversation around Lenin is being continued to evolve and shape the country's collective memory. This multiplicity of voices, even polyphony, was concentrated in the debate on Lenin's mausoleum. Let us briefly recall its history and contemporary events that have divided Russian society. Lenin died on January 21, 1924, of his 4th successive cerebral hemorrhage. His health had already been steadily deteriorating, so his death did not come as a surprise to party leaders. As early as the autumn of 1923, at the meeting of the Politburo, consisting of Stalin, Trotsky, Bukharin, Kalinin, Kamenev, and Rykov, when the meeting was held, at which Stalin announced that Lenin's health had deteriorated greatly and that a fatal end was possible. In this regard, Stalin announced that some comrades from the provinces, this is quotation, had proposed to embalm Lenin's body in the event of Lenin's death. Lev Trotsky was greatly disturbed by the proposal, who, despite the fact that he was an atheist, rightly saw the intention as an attempt to secularize the figure of the leader of the revolution. He said, I quote, When Comrade Stalin had finished his speech, I alone understood the direction of this, at first incomprehensible arguments and hints that Lenin was a Russian and that he should be buried in Russian tradition. In the Russian tradition, according to the canons of the Russian Orthodox Church, saints were made relics. It seems that we, the parties of revolutionary Marxism, are being advised to go in the same direction in order to preserve Lenin's body. Previously, there was relics of Sergiusz of Radonesh and Serafim of Sarov. Now they want to replace them with the relics of Vladimir Ilyich. I would very much like to know who are those comrades in the provinces who, according to Stalin, proposed to embalm Lenin's remains with the help of modern science and made relics out of them. I would tell them that they have nothing to do with the teaching of Marxism. According to the official Soviet historiography, the decision to preserve Lenin's body was made after numerous letters from workers asking them to leave Lenin's body intact, to preserve it for centuries, to make it a symbol of the new era of communism. The Central Executive Committee and Dzierżyński's commission received letters and telegrams from party cells in various parts of the country. However, they mainly concerned the issue of preserving the memory of Lenin in architectural objects and monuments, or contained specific requests to allow a delegation from one district or another city to come to Moscow to bid farewell to Lenin. Numerous appeals and statements can be found at the Russian Center for the Protection and Research of Documents of Modern History. As for the embalming and long-term conservation of Lenin's body, no letters with such a proposal have been found in the archives. 24 hours after Lenin's death, on January 22, 1924, academician Alexei Abrikosov embalmed his body. On the same day, the Central Executive Committee of the Soviet Union decided to build a crypt near the Kremlin wall in order to preserve Lenin's body, I quote, among the mass graves of the fighters of the October Revolution, and make it available to the public. Architect Alexei Shchushev was commissioned to design and build the crypt. In the first days after Lenin's death, rumors began to circulate that the body exposed to the public was not real, and that there were a wax mummy in the coffin. The rumors proved to be persistent. They were spread in the foreign press, and in the Soviet Union they appeared even in the late 30s of the 20th century. In the mid-30s, Western media journalists were invited to the mausoleum to topple it. The American journalist Louis Fisher wrote that Boris Barsky opened the sarcophagus in his presence and turned Lenin's head left and right, proving that he was not a wax figure. In the late 80s of the 20th century, it was rumored that Lenin's body had been replaced by a doppelganger or even a doll, because it had not been preserved during his evacuation to Tyumen during Second World War. It was 1941. At the end of the 20th century, a version appeared about the use of doublets, with which the body is periodically replaced. The rumors had a real basis, but the reason for their appearance was the lack of necessary information in the public domain. In order to maintain the elasticity of the body, unique treatments were carried out on it, and biological materials were gradually replaced by artificial ones. The special commission that examined the condition of the body believed that it had even improved. By ordinary visitors saw only the hands and head of Vladimir Lenin, like you can see in the picture, and could not assess the veracity of the statements of the members of the commission. Lenin's corpse was an object of worship to such an extent that letters with complaints and requests from visitors were found next to the sarcophagus. Entering the crypt required standing in queues for hours. By the way, I was also standing in that queue many years ago. In relation to Lenin as a symbol, attitudes opposite to those mentioned above were also observed. Even during the Stalinist period, the mausoleum, becoming one of the main symbols of Soviet power, attracted the attention of activists and citizens with different views. Attempts to throw Molotov cocktails, ink, and various objects at the mausoleum and the Kremlin wall have been recorded since the 1930s. There were many attempts to smash, shoot, and blow up the sarcophagus inside. Between 1924 and 1991, the Mausoleum Commandant's Office, the Red Banner Kremlin Regiment, and the Police Department for the Protection of Public Order in Red Square of the Moscow, a main Directorate of International Affairs, were involved in the protection of the sarcophagus, the Lenin, and generally the mausoleum. In March 1934, during the Holodomor, Mitrofan Nikitin, an employee of one of the state farms in Moscow region, intended to shoot Lenin's body, but was stopped by security guards. Nikitin shot himself on the spot. After a search, they found a letter to the government and the party, and here you can see the quotation from this letter. Nikitin wrote, "In the spring of 1934, again, a great many people will die of hunger, filth, and epidemic diseases. It is possible that our rulers who have settled in the Kremlin do not see that people do not want this kind of life, that it is impossible to live like this, that they do not have enough strength and willingness." Attempts to desecrate or destroy the sarcophagus were made almost every year. On the way of perestroika, there were proposals to rebury Lenin. They were motivated differently. The first proposal to rebury Lenin's body was made in 1989. At the Congress of People's Deputies of the Soviet Union, Deputy Yuri Karyakin said that Lenin wanted to be buried in the cemetery next to his mother's grave. However, the document indicating Lenin's last will has not been found, so Karyakin's word cannot be confirmed. Nevertheless, the movement for Lenin's reburial grew. Among the arguments, there were also those that are difficult to take seriously, such as the one that Lenin was not buried in a Christian way, so that the mausoleum is a vampiric abode, and Lenin himself is a creature that feeds on the energy of Russian people. There were also voices that erecting mausoleum for chiefs were the domain of wild cultures. Proponents of the latter view ignore the fact that Napoleon's remains are kept in a mausoleum in France, the embalmed body of Field Marshal Michael Barclay de Tolly in Estonia, and so on. Not mentioning Marshal Józef Piłsudski is buried in sarcophagus in the Krakow Cathedral. There was also an idea to burn the corpse and pour ash over the container in the Mariana Trench. The main motive of those who want to rebury Lenin's body is that he is a war criminal. Leninism was a totalitarian ideology, and the mausoleum is a manifestation of Leninism. On April 21, 1989, Mark Zakharov said, live on the Vzgliad program, that it was time to forgive Lenin and bury him as a man. On September 5th, 1991, with Mikhail Gorbachev's approval, Anatoly Sobchak, then mayor of Moscow, attempted to bury Lenin. He spoke at a meeting of deputies with a proposal based on Lenin's non-existent will, with the desire to be buried in the Volkovsky cemetery in Leningrad. Sobchak supported the mayor of Moscow, Gavril Popov. The democratic press published flattering articles about the merits of the Volkovsky cemetery and the necessary mention of the imminent reburial of Lenin's body in the cemetery. This sparked an avalanche of protests letters sent to Kremlin. On September 11, 1991, at a meeting at the Lenin Central Museum, the social committee called In Defense of Lenin was formed. On September 12, there were rumors that the body would be smuggled out of the mausoleum at night, so the picketers went to the Red Square and formed a people's detachment to protect Lenin's body. On October 10th of the same year, a demonstration of Moscow workers took place in front of the building of the Moscow City Council. Together, the participants made an appeal to Mikhail Gorbachev, demanding that Lenin's body be protected from attacks. The reburial of Lenin, this time as an ordinary man, was to mark the end of one era and the beginning of another. Symbolizing a certain ideology, dead and lasting only in a petrified form, Lenin, by changing the place of his posthumous residence, was to take away what was bad in Soviet times. The vehemence of the reactions to transference indicated active forms of magical thinking, a belief that a single gesture could wipe out decades of ideological influence. On April 22, 1994, Valeria Novodvorskaya organized a picket under slogan, "Let's bury the case and Lenin's body." She was detained and made a statement that she would sue the police for resurrecting Stalinist methods of maintaining order. And in 1996, one of the main ideologues of perestroika, Alexander Yakovlev, published at his own expense a pamphlet about the need to carry out the process of Bolshevism. And here I put into the presentation the quotation piece of his pamphlet. Why do we need such an assessment, such a reckoning with the past? As Lenin still lies in the mausoleum revered, the whole country is dotted with his monuments, and he is a criminal. The ideology of violence is not dead. With such a load, it is difficult to move forward quickly. I'm not saying that everyone should repent or get down on their knees. No, we just need to realize, understand what we have left behind. On November 7th, we all continue to celebrate this holiday, renaming it the Day of Harmony and Reconciliation. I suggest that it be renamed the Day of Sorrow and Repentance. On this day, families should not go to demonstrations. It is better to stay at home. This day is essential for citizens to remember their loved ones who have died as a result of wars and repressions. This need to come to terms with the past was universal, at least on a declarative level. A little time earlier than the events mentioned above, in October 1993, the mayor of Moscow, Yuri Lushkov, presented a draft presidential decree titled On the Restoration of the Historical Appearance of Moscow's Red Square. They read, the events that took place in Moscow on October 24th force us to ask Boris Yeltsin to resolve the issue of the reburial of the bodies of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and more than 400 people arresting against the Kremlin wall. On March 14, 1994, Boris Yeltsin proposed burying Lenin. As he wrote in his will next to his mother in St. Petersburg, despite the lack of such a will. On March the same year, at a session of the State Duma, Yeltsin's statement about reburial were called illegal and equated with vandalism. On June the same year, 1997, the State Duma adopted a law on the status of Red Square in Moscow. The document prohibited the reconstruction of existing buildings on Red Square and the construction of new ones that violate the historical appearance of the square. On June 11, the Federation Council rejected the bill. On 11 December, a second attempt was made to pass the law, but the Council again rejected it. So, as you can see, the struggle was really fierce. On June 6th, Boris Yeltsin again announced Lenin's will and his desire to bury him in St. Petersburg. Later, there was a version that the idea of reburying was to distract people from Yeltsin's health. He was to undergo a complicated operation, and due to the crisis of 1998, the action of transferring the body had to be cancelled. The Russian Orthodox Church joined the dispute over Lenin's legacy. Patriarch Alexei II spoke out in favor of reburial, arguing that Red Square is a place for rock concerts, which is a desecration of eternal rest. A year later, however, the same patriarch proposed that the concerts be banned and that the mausoleum be left where it is. On September 15, 1999, the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation declared the liquidation of the necropolis unacceptable. Reference was made to the fact that in 1990, Lenin's mausoleum and the necropolis under the Kremlin wall were inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List, and since 1995, they have been granted the status of objects of historical and cultural heritage of national importance. In May 2000, the Association of Relatives of Persons Buried in the Honorary Necropolis under the Kremlin Wall was registered. On December 15th, the same year, the association sent an open letter to President Vladimir Putin in which it was written that attempts to destroy the mausoleum and necropolis are a discreditation of the historical memory of the nation. Putin endorsed the association's view, and here in the presentation you can see the quotation, the words by Putin. He said, "Our country lived for 70 years under the monopolistic power of the Communist Party. At that time, it is the life of an entire generation. Many people associate their lives with Lenin's name. For them, Lenin's funeral means the following. For them, it will mean that they worshipped false values, that they set false goals for themselves, and that their lives were in vain. I think these kinds of actions can lead to the kind of destructive state that we have already experienced." In early April 2006, the director of the Institute of Russian History, Vladimir Lavrov, wrote an official letter in which he indicated that Russia would not be able to develop democratically until it parted with the symbols of the communist utopia and the Red Terror, because Lenin and Stalin were personally responsible for the repressions, the Gulag and national genocide. Also, according to Vladimir Lavrov, the maintenance of Lenin's body should not be at the expense of taxpayers, and the necropolis on Red Square should be liquidated. On the other hand, he said that if each new generation settles account with the previous one, nothing good will come out of it. So the political support for reburying Lenin was juxtaposed with the aspect of cultural memory and generational experience. Affirmative and critical voices can be ordered according to the following criteria: moral, historical memory, realistic approach, oriented towards the future, pragmatic, a mausoleum is an architectural monument. And let's have a brief look at some examples of that contradictory voices, each of which indicates to different position, different point of view. Quotation first: keeping Lenin's mausoleum in the heart of Moscow is an affront to those who suffered under Soviet rule. It glorifies a man responsible for countless human rights abuses and atrocities. This perspective reflects the argument against preserving Lenin's mausoleum based on moral grounds. Critics believe that Lenin's leadership during the Soviet era resulted in severe human rights violations and economic hardship for many citizens. They consider his mausoleum as a symbol that glorifies a dark period in history, and preserving it may be seen as an insult to those who suffered during that time. But the next quotations come from a supporter. The mausoleum serves a historical artifact and a reminder of Russia's past, regardless of one's political opinions. It has value for preservation and it holds cultural significance and attracts tourists. This viewpoint emphasizes the historical and cultural importance of Lenin's mausoleum. Supporters argue that regardless of whether one agrees with Lenin's ideology or actions, preserving it serves as a tangible historical artifact representing a significant chapter in Russian history. They believe it helps educate visitors about the country's past, attracts tourists, and contributes to the identity and heritage of Moscow as a global city. The next quotation is from a kind of reform advocates. Russia should focus on the future rather than keeping relics of the past. Demolishing Lenin's mausoleum is necessary to move towards reconciliation and unity. This quote in turn highlights the perspective of reform advocates who argue that demolishing Lenin's mausoleum would represent a step toward reconciliation and unity for Russia. They believe that the preservation of the mausoleum hinders progress and perpetuates division among citizens who have differing opinions about the Soviet era. They argue that initiating reform efforts and focusing on building a brighter future for the country should take precedence over preserving a symbol of the past. And last of the presented quotations: Lenin's mausoleum is an architectural marvel and a symbol of the power and influence of Russia. It should be preserved for the future generations. This perspective focuses on the architectural significance of Lenin's mausoleum. Advocates argue that it represents an impressive example of Soviet-era architecture and design. Preserving it is seen as an opportunity to appreciate and study the artistic and engineering achievements of that period. Additionally, they argue that preserving iconic landmarks helps maintain Russia's global status and influence in the field of architecture. And some conclusions on Lenin's legacy and Russia's cultural memory, of course, partial conclusions. The Lenin's legacy have significant implications for Russia's cultural memory, as they shape the way the nation remembers and perceives its history and identity. The repercussions can be observed in the following ways. First of all, shaping historical narrative. The debates on Lenin shape how Russia's history is interpreted and presented. Supporters of Lenin argue for his role as a revolutionary leader who laid the foundation for the Soviet Union, while critics emphasize the brutalities and totalitarianism associated with his regime. These debates influence the way his history books, museums, and monuments present the past, making it contested area between different interpretations. Secondly, impact on national identity. Lenin's legacy holds a central position in the formation of Russia's national identity. Supporters portray Lenin as a national hero and a symbol of Russian resilience during tumultuous times, while detractors argue that glorifying Lenin undermines the suffering experienced under his regime. The debates influence Russia's perceptions of their past, present, and future, and the way they define their national identity. Thirdly, political divisions. Discussion on Lenin have not only cultural but also political implications. The debates are often intertwined with larger political debates, such as the role of the state, the nature of governance, or the stance towards communism. These discussions can trigger divides within society, with some segments aligning themselves with the communist ideology and viewing Lenin as a positive figure, while others reject him as a symbol of authoritarianism or even actively promoting the Communist Party's propaganda. And fourth aspect of that cultural memory, a repudiation of Soviet past. For some, the debates around Lenin's legacy are linked to broader discussions surrounding the Soviet past. Critics argue that Lenin's policies laid the groundwork for the repressive Soviet regime and its atrocities. As a result, attempts to confront this past often involve reassessing Lenin's role and his impact on Russian history, fostering a re-evaluation of the Soviet era as a whole. And last but not least, influence on public opinion and memory. The debates on Lenin's legacy shape public opinion and memory in Russia, particularly among younger generation. As the country undergoes political and societal transformations, the understanding and interpretation of Lenin's role continue to evolve. This process influences how people remember and commemorate historical events and figures, contributing to shifts in collective memory and its impact of society. In conclusion, the debates on Lenin legacy have profound implications on Russia's cultural memory, shaping historical narratives, political divisions, and national identity. The discussions influence how the nation remembers its past, reinterprets its history, and views its future trajectory, with significant consequences for Russia's cultural and societal landscape. And may I be allowed to stop here? Thank you very much for your attention, and I invite you to ask questions. I hope I will be able to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Małgorzata. Thank you for a very interesting, inspiring lecture, which shed new light on Russia's political culture memory, and Lenin's legacy. Now I give the floor to Grzegorz for discussion. Grzegorz, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Yes, well, indeed, first place, thank you very much, Professor Abassy, for your truly epic panoramic story about Lenin's meaning, actually, for contemporary Russian identity. Truly fascinating story about how contested memory on Lenin has been truly significant, if not the narrative, yes, on how to build a new Russian identity after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So in Poland, yes, we have a saying that even though Lenin's been dead for quite some time, he's been still alive, yes, alive in collective debates. Lenin is alive, indeed. He's a very controversial kind of icon, yes. Actually, personally, as a sociologist, I may actually approach Lenin's legacy in terms of like remembering the communist Tsar. Lenin, I think, enjoyed that status as a communist emperor. And therefore, you see, now, in light of Russian kind of, I would say, rebirth of this imperial dream, once we are great, I think Lenin is back. Lenin is back. Lenin means, yes, kind of depicts the glory time when Russia was actually, Russian Revolution. This was very much like shaping the idea of ever greater Russia itself, Russian culture, Russian civilization. Very well. So I'm sure plenty of questions. Yes, so Professor Abassy, I would now please open up the floor for questions, interventions, please. Yes, your questions, your interventions, comments to Professor Abassy's lecture, please. Yes, anybody, please? Yes, yes.
I believe that the lecture was very informational, so there's not many questions. I have only one more, maybe cultural, about the preservation of Lenin's body and maybe more of the sacrification of it. How far did it go with considering his body, his flesh, more holy, like as it was in the times of Rus?
Thank you very much for indeed interesting question. It is something I wanted to mention, but I didn't want to make this lecture half of a day long, so I had to limit some plots. The Soviet Union was an atheistic state, and we know this. But the fact that it was atheistic and the religion was banned, it doesn't mean that a kind of spiritual loneliness was stopped at one moment. And this embalming Lenin's body was a kind of sacralization of the body, looking for an eternal symbol which will be lasting forever. What's even more interesting, this a kind of very simple faith, not religion of the Orthodox Church, of religion of modern people, but a kind of very old belief is reflected in that conviction that mausoleum and Lenin's body is a kind of vampiric phenomenon that is fed on people's lives. So obviously it was a kind of sacralization of Lenin's body, but sacralization according to the communist state rules, without mentioning religion, but with referring and appealing to religious feeling of the people. So obviously it is. And if about the embalming, he was embalmed twice, because shortly after his death, he was embalmed for a short period of 7 days. And it was something practiced in the Soviet Union because many thousands of people traveled to his coffin to bid farewell to him. So this body had to stay unattached for several days. But then it was embalmed for a long time, and this embalming has been periodically repeated. As I mentioned, I don't know exactly how is it doing from technical point of view, but it is being renovated regularly, not to allow it to decay. So thank you for the question, and this is the answer. And by the way, may I be allowed to mention, it's a kind of a joke. During Yeltsin's era, it was a very difficult period for the Russian people because they lost their communist past. They were looking for new identity symbols. Lenin was not able to become a symbol of identity for them because he was old, drunk, and ill. And there was a joke within among Russian people that who is ruling Russia nowadays? Answer was two people, eternally living Lenin and hardly living Yeltsin. So that's the importance of the Lenin as a symbol of persistence of culture. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for your answer.
Very well. Yes, please. Any other questions, comments, agreements, disagreements, interventions, please? Lenin alive and kicking in the memory, yes, generational memory of Russians. How about, look, maybe just addressing the question of split between generations. Professor Abassy outlined that convincingly, yes, a split between generations, generational memory factor, yes, while approaching Lenin's contested legacy. So maybe we could now, yes, perhaps address that, how deep this split between generations been, yes, within the Russian society over Lenin's legacy. Is it still kind of like a deepening divide, or perhaps, yes, we observe a kind of status quo in terms of like generational split, please? Yes.
This tendency is rather stable, and it is directly connected with the age of the respondents. Yuri Levada Center conducted surveys on Lenin and on the idea of his rebirthing. So it was, for example, in 2019, they asked Russians about their views on Lenin and his role in history. And according to the results, the majority of respondents, 58%, believed that Lenin played a positive role in Russian history. 24% had a negative opinion of him. However, it is important to note that there were significant differences in opinion depending on respondents' age and political ideology. Yes. So this division is between generations, and it is one, older and younger. And the other line of division is between people with liberal views and those more conservative or communist views.
Yes, indeed. Yes, but please, perhaps you may have some other questions, yes, regarding the legacy of Lenin and its meaning for the contemporary, yes, pretty turbulent indeed, Russian identity construction process, Russia at war, yes, and then the impact, yes, of Lenin's legacy, please. Yes, maybe we can tackle this one actually. I see we've got perhaps Julio, yes, is with us. Julio, if you. You could now step in, please, Julio. Okay.
Yeah. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for this re-encounter after our meeting in Krakow. It's a very good opportunity to see each other once again. Well, thank you first of all to Professor Abassy, because his lecture has been very insightful for me, and my reflection come across with a contrast about how we deal with memory in different countries, mainly in the west of Europe and in the east of Europe. Given the Spanish case, it's very interesting to see how Lenin remains in the middle of Moscow, and General Franco was removed from the grave, from the Valley of the Fallen, recently, some years ago. No? And I would like to pose one question. Given there is a division between youngers and eldest people in Russia, and given that the youth, the Russian youth, is more opposed to this memory, to this figure of Lenin, do you think that the situation could change within the next years during the after Putin era? It's just my question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the comment and for the question. I would like to comment on your comment because it is very, very interesting question. How is Lenin's legacy contested or not contested all over the world? And I even thought that it would be an excellent topic for another research platform or maybe research team. Lenin's writings, particularly State and Revolution and What is to be Done, continue to be studied in academic circles for all over the world. It is first, so he has intellectual and historical significance, and it would be worth of studying in a broader sense. His legacy has also influence on political movements all over the world. So at least these two topics, two plots, might be investigated, studied in comparative perspective in different countries. And if about your questions, it is like this. Generally, the Russian youth, as far as I know, is not interested in political presence or future of the country. From time to time, they follow a political leader, like Navalny some time ago, or any other political leaders, but generally they are rather not interested in political matters of the country, ideological. So they are a very good group as supporters for a leader who has concrete views. And if there is such a leader, such a group after Putin's era, the youth can follow him and follow his views, but the very youth as a group is rather negligent to this problem, to this topic. They dream of economic prosperity. They dream of freedom in a very vague understanding. For them, freedom is to now, during the time of war, is to leave country, to be able to buy goods in the shop. So in such a very simple way. So I'm really sorry, but I do not have much hope in the Russian youth.
Yes. So it seems, Professor Abassy, that young Russians seem to follow this kind of very much like conformist, path of actually approaching its legacy, kind of amnesia, amnesia about the past, focusing on here and now.
They can be also tired with this referring to the past, because it is not only the specificity of the Russian youth. I also study Iranian youth. Now they struggle for women's rights and for human rights because violation by legal regulations is obvious. But generally, they are not interested in looking towards the past. They were born in post-Soviet era, and they want to look towards the future, not towards the past. So it's
indeed. I see Anna. Yes, if you could now, please, step in with a question or comment, please.
Yes, I have a follow-up question to this this topic of the generations. Nowadays, with the young people, not only in school but maybe also among themselves, and considering the internet, what kind of label they associate with Lenin? Is it more like he was a political thinker, or he was a war criminal, or he was a revolutionist? How do they? Where does their title for him stand? Because we know that the older generations, they had all these pilgrimages, so it was more full of respect. And how about the younger generation?
I do not access to broader research results, but that Levada Center. Of course, we can have a look into the internet resources, but they are not a good source of profound scientific knowledge. But if I would answer here and now without doing research, I would say that they associate Lenin with a communist past, and they are not interested in his figure very much. It is if about the rebellion, as I mentioned, if they support liberal views, they are pro-rebellion of Lenin and forgetting. But calling him criminal is not popular among young people. They are not so much engaged into the discussion.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Very well. Perhaps the last and final call, yes, for last interventions before we come to the conclusion of our session today, please. Final call, yes, last and final call for interventions, comments, please.
Last chance.
If not, then just on personal note, you see, I belong to the generation which was actually forced to remember Lenin as the father of the Bolshevik Revolution, yes, the man who changed the world. Now it's kind of interesting, yes, that it was worth living, as actually this time that actually young Russians no longer actually are concerned with the past. And the Bolshevik Revolution. In a way, it's a positive cultural phenomenon. But of course, yes, it's as Professor Abassy rightly pointed out, it's a kind of global civilizational phenomenon that young generation, yes, is very much like now, focused on here and now. And the famous point by Eric Hobsbawm, shot in his monograph on the history of 20th century, the shortest century, the split between the generations actually is so, I would say, significant factor determining that we have different narratives on the past and its impact on here and now. I think with this conclusion, yes, I would love to please now ask our boss, yes, Joanna, yes, please, to conclude the seminar, please. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Grzegorz. Thank you for joining our meeting. Thank you, Professor Abassy, for a very interesting, inspiring lecture. Thank you for your interesting remarks, for discussion, for all the questions. And I'd like to remind you that our last lecture will be held by Professor Zdzisław Mach and will take place on Tuesday, the 7th of December at 5 p.m. Thank you and goodbye.
Yes. Thank you and have a nice weekend. Thank you. See you soon.
Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.